Years ago, and that was why. Yeah. Go back. You stand direct. That's why. It's like sex.
Oh, yeah. Let's try that again. We told him to find pockets. Let's. I shouldn't phrase that, but I'm saying there's plenty of parking. We just don't want to pay for it. Good evening and welcome to the Building Bannister panel discussion. I am so happy to be here with you this evening. My name is Joe Wilson Jr. And for 18 years, I served as a member of the resident acting company at Trinity Rep. And now I'm proud to say that I am serving as your Director of Art, Culture, and Tourism for the extraordinary city of Providence. So before I get to my remarks, which I had hoped to deliver a few weeks ago, I'm going to thank the Rhode Island Foundation and Rhode Island Humanities for their support of this event, and also to give a shout out to the Advent School in Boston for allowing us to use their webinar. So please give a round of applause for our concert and support. And I apologize now if I'm getting a little emotional in speaking about this project and our friendship with the Bannister, our partners here at Bannister. I was looking forward to speaking to many of you on September 10th, after our PVD Fest parade. but unfortunately, I was sheltering in place with about 300 members of our community at the CIC building across the river. As many of you were sheltering in this auditorium. The department is proud to have co-produced PBD Fest 2023 with our extraordinary partners at FirstWorks, which is led by its founder, my friend and arts champion, Kathleen Pletcher. And during those 3 hours of sheltering, we were busy having discussions and making decisions about whether we needed to cancel that Sunday of the festival. Unfortunately, we had to make a very difficult decision to do just that. But my broken heart was across the river, and my full heart was with you on this side of the river. This was the 9th year of PBD Fest, and since the beginning, the mission of PBD Fest has been to elevate all of the creative capital that exists in this great city, as well as creating partnerships across our creative sector, locally, nationally, and internationally. Our partnership with the Bannister Community Art Project was one of the highlights of my experience with this festival in my 10 short months in this job. On behalf of my department and the City of Providence, we are so happy to have been included in the event surrounding the unveiling of the newest piece of public commemorative art here in our beloved city, at this hallowed spot along this river. You see, for centuries, this river has served as a crossroads, as a gathering place. For our city, this river has been a lifeblood for all who call her home. This river for many is indeed a sacred place, receiving our ancestors who have come willingly and unwillingly, but through perseverance and purpose found the strength to forge the foundations of our beloved city. This place, this spot along our river is one of reflection and inspiration. As we have undergone the process of uncovering and activating this great asset, we have continued to unleash the creative spirit of this city and this region. In honoring the great Edward Bannister with this extraordinary piece of art by the brilliant Gage Prentice, we continue to show by example the power of art in our public spaces. This beautiful piece will serve as a point of entry into a world complicated by race, but elevated by human resilience, buoyed by the power of creativity and imagination. You see, Edward Bannister wasn't just an artist, but a visionary and pioneer. The story of Bannister is one of why representation matters in our creative landscape and in creative practice. This local titan paved the way for artists like me to use their work as social justice practice and help to change the way communities engage with art. I am especially excited that this statue will allow generations of residents and visitors to learn about this incredibly significant Black artist in the historical landscape of our city. I am profoundly grateful to live in a city that sees its artists and art not as a thing to just be consumed, but a community that sees art making as a pathway to building community and centering radical joy and encouraging all to be better and to do better. And I hope this piece will inspire all of us to continue to work to ensure that all of us may live in abundance. And more importantly, in peace. Congratulations to the Bannister Community Art Project for your labor in elevating and organizing the story and life of this great man and extraordinary artist who has indeed made it possible and continues to inspire me to live my life, not only as an artist, but as an advocate and more importantly, as a public servant. And I am personally and internally, Edward, in your debt for the abundance I now experience because of you. Thank you. And it is now my pleasure to introduce the event host tonight, NBC's 10, and we share many beautiful friends of that station. Sammy Toby Adele.
Oh, again, a round of applause for Mr. Joe. I want to thank each and every one of you for being out here tonight. Thank you. And I'm hoping that this is going to be an educational, informative, and engaging night. So first things first, I'm going to introduce our panelists, and I just want to let you all know now, I know when you go to different graduation events, they tell you to hold your applause until the very end. Until they say, we're not doing that tonight. As soon as I say one panelist, please give them a round of applause. All right. So first, we are starting off with our Bannister statue sculptor, Mr. Gage Prentice. Our fine art collector, Dr. Nick Bruno. College professor of history and Africana studies, Dr. Sherry Cummings. University adjunct lecturer and Trinity Academy for the Performing Arts teacher, Michael McWaken. I'd like to introduce the volunteer events planner for this evening's event with Sean Jones. In her day job, Wishan serves as the director of development for the Advent School in Boston, and without her, tonight couldn't have been possible. So thank you. Now we are going to start with our first question for our sculptor here, Mr. Gage. First things first, if you can just tell us what inspired you to sculpt a public statue of Edward Mitchell Bannister, and what kind of preparation and planning goes into sculpting a life-size historical figure?
First, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm not sure about that first. What inspired this statue? It kind of grew on me slowly over the years, because I had discovered Bannister when I first moved here about 11 years ago. First, just as his face, which captivated me, and I was just so curious to find out who he was. One step led to another, and kind of culminated in an amazing experience I had at a show of his work in 2018 at the Bannister Museum. It was the first time that I've been surrounded by all of his actual paintings, not things I've seen online. And not only was I surrounded by all of his work, brush strokes, compositions, the colors, lit beautifully in a very intimate setting, but I was also surrounded by friends and strangers who adored him as well. And the combination of all these little bits, the conversation, the being able to really sit there and steep in his work, brought all of these little steps that I've taken as I learned about him together. And I really felt his presence get conjured in that moment. And it gave me chills, but also it was the most warm feeling. And that the feeling I got from his work and from his presence there was warm, inspiring, and optimistic. But it just filled me with joy. And that's a constant feeling that I have whenever Bannister comes from the back of my mind and forefront, which is quite often. And I just feel pure joy. And the inspiration was I wanted to use my art to share that experience with as many people as I could. And to do that, I wanted to manifest his presence in a public place, not just, away somewhere in a private collection. And I wanted it to be an invitation to start that path to his art and to his story. And the story of this whole circle, including Christiana Carto Bannister. Because that path to learn more about him, to see his artwork, to learn his story, is a path to inspiration and joy. So that's why I wanted to make this session. Preparation. A lot of preparation. Very good preparation. The first thing I do, I go through as quick as I can. I put up print ups of his paintings all over the studio, just so I could be a watch those images. Then I find all the images I can of everything, which was easy because I can only find 5. And 2 of them were authenticated, maybe 3. The other 2 are alleged photos of him. And all but 2 of them are kind of blurry, like big. So after I got those images, then I research every detail I can to make a firm foundation to fill in for all the details I know I'm going to have to invent for a historical figure that doesn't have a lot of visual documentation of him, that has lots of. Oh, I got to hurry this along. So just a couple of details. Sorry, I'm going through notes because I tried to make this brief. All the little things you have to think about public sculpture, like what angle the pencil is going to be, so it doesn't stab someone that they sit on his back. It's silly. Like a model with the approximate size and builds, you can take dozens of photos and measurements and try out positions to see how it's going to sit and work. And then, most importantly, you get all these details and you see yourself in what you imagine him to be like. So you build a box of limitations to work inside. So the impressions you get of this man have a strong enough skeleton to hang on to, so that he's real, his presence is real as you can make someone you never met. So that is the real cliff notes.
I'm going to come back to you, have some more questions. But speaking of collection, Mr. Nick, we understand that you have an extensive collection of original art painted by the Providence Art Club, members during the 19th and early 20th centuries. And one of them, of course, is Mr. Banner. So what brought about your interest in him?
Is the story behind it that were about my interest. The story of Edward Bannister is about personal drive, dedication, and perseverance. It is also the story of Against All Odds, and I found this alluring as a collector. Back in 1867, while Edward was living with his wife Christiana in Boston, there was an article published in the New York Herald that demeaned both Bannister and his work. The following is quoted from this article, quote, "The Negro has an appreciation for art while being manifestly unable to produce it," end quote. This article no doubt spurred Bannister's desire to achieve success as an artist. Less than 10 years later, Bannister took home the top award in a major exhibition. Years ago, as a young collector of Rhode Island art, I primarily focused on the founding members of the Providence Art Club in Rhode Island School of Design. I was particularly captivated by the story surrounding Edward Bannister and his award-winning painting Under the Oaks, which Mr. Bannister entered at the 1876 Philadelphia Centennial Exhibition. Paintings in this exhibition were entered by the most prominent American artists of the time, including Albert Bierstadt, J.F. Cropsey, and Frederick E. Church. In order to prevent any bias, the paintings were given a number and title and not the artist's name. When it was announced that Bannister's painting Under the Oaks entered anonymously in tag number 54, had won the first place bronze medal, Bannister recalled the resentment expressed by the judges. Bannister wrote years later that when he had come to claim his prize for under the oaks, quote, "An explosion could not have made a more marked impression," end quote. There was initially some talk about the judges rescinding the prize to Bannister. However, after pressure from his artist colleagues, quote, "Soon everyone was bowing and scraping to me," end quote. Thank you.
So we'll now go over to Mike. What first got you interested in Mr. Bannister and this project? And then what do you hope this project will accomplish?
Okay, thank you. Advice I have ventilating is, don't pay attention. I was originally introduced to this project and ready to become a part of this project through Betsy Zimmerman, right over there. And through other members of the Bannister Community Art Program. And I was asked to develop some lessons and some curriculum. And I was asked to develop some lessons. and our curriculum related to Bannister. Not only for students, kids that were in high school and middle school, which I teach, but also for some adults as well. And when I was first invited to do this, I was a little bit skeptical, like how you develop lesson plans and stuff like that for a classroom where teachers will actually use the material that you're offering. And so I was just skeptical about that, wondered exactly how I would be able to do that. But a little bit of research and a little bit of exploring, and absolutely, I never heard that word Bannister prior to Betsy saying, "Will you do this?" So it has been a profound learning experience for me to learn about Edward Bannister. And as I was doing some initial research, I became more convinced that not only was Edward an important part of the artistic life of our community, but he had a lot to say to my students at middle school. And his story and the story of Christiana, his spouse, was equally important to my students. And so I took that job, and the rest is history. It's been an amazing ride. It's been just an incredible experience to be a part of this project and to work with so many just incredibly fantastic human beings as a part of this project. It's been a real privilege. But what I hope the project will accomplish? The two things really that I think are really important that I hope. One is I hope the project will raise the stories of other really, truly incredible Black people here in our city and in our state. There are some amazing human beings of color that have done amazing things in our state, and they have been lost in history, or their stories have not been told, and stuff like, people like George Downing, Prince Updike's, Duchess, they're amazing people, right? And they've done some amazing things for our state. And what I'm hoping will happen as a result of this is this will be an inspiration for us to carry down the stories of other people that have really been amazing contributors to the life, culture, and history of our amazing state. There's some really beautiful stories to be told there. The other thing I'm really hoping for, and this is a private dream that I have, is that we will, through this project, will inspire educators to think about other ways that we can teach history. And move away from the more traditional ways of talking about history and talking about people and honoring the way that the past has been shared within communities. And quite often the way that history and the past has been shared within communities is through folklore and storytelling and music and dance as a way of communicating history and respecting the way those stories of the past have been told. And so I hope that this project will be a way to inspire us to think about that and move forward in some other ways to talk about the past.
Next, Dr. Sherry, how does your work, excuse me, everyone, my voice is going in and out tonight, but how does your work as a professor of history and Africana studies relate to Edward Bannister and the Statue Project?
First and foremost, thank you for inviting me. I am so honored to be here, and I hope you all hear me because Like, even my voice is going in and out, my allergies just exploded. But, living and teaching in Providence, I try to get my students out of the classroom because I always tell them that history is in your face. And so I'll give them assignments where they literally have to go out on the street. Out on the streets and look at what's around them and talk about it. That's the first and foremost. They have to talk about what they're seeing, what they're looking at, and then come back into the classroom and we'll have that discussion. But so for them to see Edward Bannister commemorated in this way, it makes his life, his work, and the communities that he was involved in less abstract for them. And it's like seeing their lectures, the talks, me just talking in front of them, just real. And it just bounces off that page for them, especially for students of color who have grown up in Providence and who are not interacting with their history or has not interacted with their history. And so the statue project makes that history more tangible too.
So now we are going to switch gears a bit and talk a little bit more about actually creating the statue that sits not too far from where we're gathered here this evening. So Gage, how did you sculpt Bannister and what were the steps? Kind of walk us through that.
All right, here we go to the timeline.
Yes.
My process is really slow and chaotic with a constant tide of tearing things down and rebuilding them, cutting off parts and attaching them there. So I don't really have steps. But if I had to put in the steps, first I would get glass, which is an amazing material that you can work from liquid form, depending on its temperature, all the way up to as chocolate. So I'm carving, it's palatinize using brushes, all the way up to dental tools, all the way to Chevys and cleavers. I just use it all, and it's very physical and lots of fire and fun to look at. First, I make the furniture, then I build the furniture out of foam for S. I refine. I start with the portrait head first, because if I can get the head right, I start to feel the face happening, but I'm confident that it can make the rest of the body work. I build the bench first for scale, because it has to sit somewhere. Then I weld up the steel armature, I build out the cardboard and foam to reduce the weight. I call this my mushroom phase, because if you use expanding foam, that's what it looks like. I carve that into a gesture mannequin, I call it, then I begin building up the glass. Find the gesture, anatomy, giving physical gravity, so it sits on the bench. I have lines, to make silhouettes for clothing. I refine those. Once I feel that a person is on that bench, I review all of my measurements, all my reference materials, except for the portrait photo and his paintings. And I focus on the portrait until I feel that my impression of Bannister is accurate. And when I hit there, I stop, I zoom on it, and I go back in the morning to see if he's still there. And I do this many, many times. I must have redone this portrait about 7 times in that year. But when I felt that it was ready, I called the steering committee to come in and they gave me the thumbs up. Then I do touch it. I will not do it to my studio until I have to bring it to the foundry, because I will do that. And that is really, and that's how I do it.
Stay on Gage for a minute. We have to ask, were there any challenges in sculpting this statue?
Main challenges, I think, came with material, mishaps with fire and temperature control. On more than one occasion, I had to change the steel armature. And steel armature can only be changed by cutting it, heating it up with a acetylene torch, and then rewelding it. This thing is completely covered in foam. So not very well hydrated foam. So you have to, I have no running water in the studio, so I have to have buckets and maybe spray things and fire extinguishers, but you cut it, that's no problem. Putting it back together, a surgeon got to remove all the meat from the bone. the metal was hot, no matter what you do, and it creeps and creeps and creeps. On more than one occasion, I had it catch fire, and then travel into the piece like a stove fund. So excitement ensues. Lots of toxic smoke and we're good on that. But what comes in that is I'm also really frugal, so spend a lot on air conditioning or heat. So in the winter, it is cold as a meat locker in there, and I have to cover the piece. And in the summer, it can get up to 98 degrees in the studio. And the wax itself becomes like spread with butter, it's pieces. So I go to bed and I come out the next day and it look like Mr. Bannister had a stroke. Repair and do everything and finally, submit and turn on the AC. To bring it up to 74. So yeah, those are the challenges, just my own problems and materials.
I would love to watch that process.
I will never film on my studio. Students.
Thank you for that. And so we're going to move to the Sherry. So considering the time that Edward Bannister lived, the 19th century, what challenges did he face as an artist of African descent living during those times?
So, I think the biggest challenge Bannister faced was to be seen as an artist, not a Black artist, or even a Black man curious about art. Whenever Bannister and his brother William arrived in Boston in 1850, the city was had the third largest free Black community in the Northeast, behind Philadelphia and New York, and was a stronghold for abolitionism. It was also a very segregated city, and not immune to racial prejudice. Despite the city being a cultural center boasting literary clubs and a vibrant art scene, opportunities for Bannister to participate in these circles were often closed to people of color. So Bannister grew increasingly frustrated because he was not able to take advantage of opportunities that would further his skills as an artist like his white counterparts. So this brings me back to the article that Dr. Bruno mentioned in the New York Herald, and quote, "The Negro seems to have an appreciation for art while being manifestly unable to produce it. This further fueled Bannister's drive to become a successful artist." So in 1870, the Bannisters, of course, moved to Providence, and 6 years later, he would enter his painting under the oath into Philadelphia's Centennial Exposition and won first prize. He had intentionally submitted his work with just a signature because he knew the biases he would face if the judges knew that he was a Black man. And when the judges learned that he was indeed a Black man, they wanted to reconsider the award for protests from other artists and patients, white and Black, stayed their decision. So these are just some of the things that he has.
And so I have a follow-up question for you. I guess, think about this. So I'm sure our audience is a little curious as to what inspired Bannister's portraits as well as his landscapes. So can you, I guess, walk us through his influences?
Of course. So looking at Bannister's work, I can say that there are 3 major influences that he draws upon. And first, in order to understand them, we have to go back to Betsy King, and that's New Brunswick, Canada, right? So, as some of us may know, New Brunswick was one of the first settlements of Black loyalists during the American Revolution. There were also a community of free Black people who had died from the Underground Railroad, as well as those who had been formerly enslaved. So he was already used to this community of Black abolitionism, self-determination, etc. Right? As well as let me go backwards, as well as from people that fought in the War of 1812. So again, this spirit of liberty, self-determination, this is what he grew up with. And because of the inhospitable conditions as well as environmental conditions, Black people in these communities were like, you don't have to stand for this. I'm going to emigrate to Sierra Leone. I'm going to find greener pastures, because right now I can assert my self-determination here. And so Bannister and his brother grew up in a diverse community where Black people were fighting for rights and actively engaging in activities to assert this self-determination. After the death of his mother in 1844, we understand that Bannister and his brother both lived with a wealthy lawyer and merchant, Harris Hatch, and where it's believed that his mother or his grandmother was a housekeeper for this person. And the Bannister brothers worked as shipmates and cooks on board vessels, traveling up and down the Canadian coast. In addition to his growing love of music and literature, Edward took every opportunity to draw. George Forbes, a family friend, quotes, "The results of his pen might be seen on the fences and barn door or wherever else he could charcoal or crayon out rude likenesses of men or things about him." It's funny, I'm picturing a little kid sitting there, right? So, and in a late 19th century interview, Bannister states that he was inspired by his mother to pursue art. This is his first inspiration. And quotes, "The love of art in some form came to me from my mother, who was born within a stone's throw of my birthplace, on the banks of the St. Croix River. She encouraged and fostered my childhood propensities for drawing and coloring. She helped me with my lessons, which I was prone to neglect, for the more congenial work of drawing." So after the Bannister brothers arrived in Boston, they were immersed in this world of activism, especially working as barbers in Christiana cartoon shop, which was a center for the Black community with doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs, and activists. And it was a meeting place for abolitionists. And the pair would also become involved in the fight to get equal pay and treatment for Black soldiers in the Union Army. He would also become a friend of Frederick Douglass, which I find fascinating. In 1854, Bannister received his first commission for an oil painting, The Ship Outward Bound, from Dr. John Van Sally DeGrasse, the first African-American to be formally educated as a doctor in the United States. At the time, Black Bostonians were heavily protesting the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. So if we place Bannister's artwork in the context of what is happening in Boston at the moment, we understand that the subject of a ship leaving a harbor, as in Bannister's, the painting Ship Outward Bound, had both personal and political meaning. The vessel was a powerful symbol, evoking the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade. With the passing of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, Black Bostonians often watched these ships carrying unfortunate souls from Boston back to their southern enslavers. These outward bound floating prisons were visible reminders of the efforts of Boston's Black community to aid those escaping the shackles of slavery. Emotionally resonant on so many levels to African Americans, Bannister's creations must be read as more than compositional studies of floating vessels, blue skies, and dark seas. Lastly, during the 1850s, Bannister became increasingly known for his portraitures among the Black community. Very often, Black people were depicted as characters, dehumanized figures imagined by white artists and unable to escape the prescription of slavery. But having one's portrait painted defied racist prescriptions and placed Black people on equal footing. They were dignified, educated, and in every way capable of being citizens. Black Americans understood the importance of the image as a visual symbol of right in American society, and Bannister's portraits helped to achieve this. Yay.
And so now we are going to take it back to Dr. Nick. Now, the Worcester Art Museum recently acquired Bannister's painting, The Hay Gatherers, from you. So please tell us about this painting, and was this a difficult decision for you to make?
The first time I viewed Bannister's The Hay Gatherers was at the Whitney Museum of American Art in Stamford, Connecticut, in November 1992. When I saw it, I was awestruck. I was captivated by its composition, atmospheric treatment of the trees, the expansiveness of the landscape, and the activity portrayed with numerous black figures. The play of light and shadow throughout and the dynamic and tight brushstrokes demonstrated to me its technical virtuosity. At the time of that museum show, I was fortunate enough to have owned my first Bannister painting titled Wisdom Returning, which was also on display there at the Whitney. In 1997, while looking at Antiques magazine, I spotted a full-page ad announcing the offering for sale of the Hay Galleries. I immediately called the Rhode Island Gallery, and within 1 week, I purchased the painting. 3 weeks after I purchased the painting, I was contacted by the Oxford University Press. They asked me if I would give permission to allow their author, Sharon Patton, permission to use the image of Bannister's The Hay Galleries in the upcoming Oxford History of Art series entitled African American Art, and I brought a copy of that here. It's what you call a student course book. In any event, so I gave my permission and was told that I would receive a couple of copies of the book once released. About 3 years later, I received a call from an art consultant. He told me that he was actively working with important collectors to find and purchase American art, including African American art. He then relayed, he told me that his clients were Bill and Camille Cosby. He then relayed a very generous offer. The consultant then priority mailed me his bio and very generous written offer. I turned it down as I was not ready to part with it. Over the next 2 to 3 decades, I lived with this important work, looking at it on an almost daily basis. Periodically, I had invited into my home those interested in viewing the painting. I continued to lend it to a number of shows and gave historians and authors permission to use the image of Hay Galleries in their publications. I have met dozens of wonderful people because of this national treasure. This past year, and by the time the Worcester Art Museum expressed their interest in acquiring this painting, I had matured enough to realize that this would be the best and final resting place of this important painting. Thousands of people each year will now be able to view it up close the way I had for roughly 2.5 decades. I am very happy for the Worcester Art Museum and for myself. Fortunately for me, the Hay Galleries is only 40 minutes away.
Thank you so much for that decision because it's going to influence so many lives. So thanks for that. And so now, Mr. Mike, walk us through some of the major accomplishments that this project has already achieved.
Those are endless, so I'll just walk you through a couple, because there are just endless, and it keeps going, the accomplishments, I mean, they just keep happening, so. I'll just highlight a couple that I probably that person about it. One is we have a beautiful statue outside, right? And that statue invites us to participate publicly in celebrating the beauty of the work of our community around us. And I think that is probably the most important accomplishment that this project has made, is it's a celebration of Bannister. And it's an invitation for us to join in that celebration. And I very much appreciate that. So I thank you very much for that. Yes, so I think that's it. The other thing is every 9th grader at Trinity Academy for Performing Arts now knows who Edward and Christiana Bannister is. So I think and I think that's a pretty important topic. I'm really glad to that. And they did it full credit for us, so I'm really proud of them for that. I think the other thing is one of the projects that we did at Tabo was to sort of using the story of Christiana And the work that Christiana did and the work that Edward did as well, use that as a foundation to build a way for us to honor and respect and bring voice to the lived experiences of our own kids today. So it was a search for relevancy, taking the story of Edward and Christiana and bringing it forward into the lives of our students today. And I gotta give a shout out to Valerie and right here, right they go in my classroom almost every day, working with the students, respecting the students, having fun with the students, celebrating the students, but at the same time pushing them to their limits in terms of where their comfort zone was. And as a result of that, we had a beautifully published book of stories that the kids told, and we also have them film telling their stories to a live audience as well, and inheriting that tradition of becoming storytellers themselves. And I think that was a beautiful thing. I just gotta thank Glenn for that. And it was a pretty, I mean, just listening to the kids stand up there and tell their stories. It was pretty amazing, wasn't it, Len? It really was, wasn't it? It was just beautiful. Yeah, brought tears to our eyes. Another thing that happened is the top of film department. We are performing arts school, so we have a whole part of it just dedicated to making film. One of our seniors produced an absolutely stunning and very beautiful documentary about Christiana and Edward. And I would encourage you to please, it's on YouTube and it's also on the website that I'll tell you about. But it's absolutely a gorgeous, and mine is in there as well, Betsy's in there, and you're in there, and there's a lot of people that are a part of that documentary. And it tells a beautiful story of Edward and Christiana. And it's actually been submitted and is going to be submitted into a number of film festivals around Rhode Island and across New England. So it's on its way to being recognized in lots of places. So that's an exciting thing, and I really would encourage you to take a look at it. It's a beautiful, beautiful film produced by one of our seniors over at Top Up. The other thing that I think is really good to point out, especially for us historians, people like that, the Bannister Community Art Project is now home to probably the largest digital library of primary source material regarding Edward Christiana Bannister. It's got pretty much every city directory, every newspaper article, most of the PhD dissertations, you name it, it's there, it's been digitized, and it's available to anybody that wants to learn more about Edward Bannister. So
What is the website?
yeah, I'm gonna type, yeah, I'll pay this. Yeah, so it's pretty cool, actually. There's literally hundreds and hundreds of digitized things. There are no paintings, but it's all mostly primary source material and other material. Journals, you can think of it as there. Census reports, death certificates, person. Anyways, a lot of it. The other thing that we did that I think is a success is the bibliography that we've heard so much about. It's got right now probably around 900 entries in it. Everything from archival material to dissertations to books to newspapers to city directories, and it's an annotated bibliography. So it's not just the listing, but it tells you a little bit about what that source talks about. So that is that's there, and you can access that free on the web. It's www.bannister.info. So you get it there. Everything is there, as well as Betsy and I transcribe. Betsy and I actually transcribe the artist and his critics. So that now has also been posted to the website, as well as a history of Christiana. I mean, not history, but her genealogy. So we now know where she grew up, we know who her family members are, all the way down to just stopped it at living relatives, because they don't have permission to publish this. But so we now know much more about Christiana than we did before. So we have a whole list of her family things there. And then there's also in that same thing, there's really a very detailed and verified history of the Bannisters' lives, both in Boston and in Providence. But it's all been documented. Everything in there has been very well documented, so. So you can get you can also get a published version right here. I have some, but the art club is, and I think Betsy has some, and
there.
and I think you can also get them in Ray Ricken's place as well, so he has them there as well. So the art club, Betsy has some.
Stages of freedom.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So that's there as well, and I know Ray has some copies there as well. Yeah, I think that's all. So, yeah.
Well, we're gonna stay on you. As you just said, a lot of research went into this project, so much research. So were there any moments during the research that came to you as a surprise?
1,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, 1,000 surprises. I mean, and it's like the achievements and stuff like that. The same thing with the surprise. I mean, I knew nothing about it before I started this. So everything came to me as a massive surprise. But I'll talk about 3 of those. One, as an history teacher, I tend to talk about people in silos. So a famous historian or a famous economist or a famous artist, but I tend to put them in silos because it's easy to talk about them. And what we want to try to do is usually highlight the achievements. Well, the surprise is Edward and Christiana absolutely categorically refused to be put into a silo. They just weren't going to do that. And I'm kind of personally grateful for that. But it was, I mean, when you think about it, Edward came standing on the attics, his Glee Club, right? He took Sunday school kids out on field trips. Christiana was a member of the Providence Literary Guild, and contributed to the shelter. They were all, some of us know and love deeply. Their lives were so intertwined with their communities that they just can't be siloed. It would be unfair of them to try to tell their story in just one thing. There was this really cool YouTube, this the danger of a single story. It's on, it's so powerful. And that's the lesson I learned with Bannisters. You can't tell a single story about them. Their story is more complex and it deserves more attention than just telling a single story of an artist or a hair doctors. So I think that was one thing that caught me by surprise. They didn't cooperate when we put them in this stuff. Developing just some research that I kind of picked up on. There's a story that Edward and Christiana, he applied for a job working for Christiana, and she hired him as a barber in one of her salons. And they did their work together and eventually fell in love and got married. And that's a beautiful story, right? And it actually may be true. I don't know. It's very possible, but either way, it's still a beautiful story to be told, right? However, in my research, I did learn that there is a possibility, just a possibility. I don't want to just throw it in there too much, okay? But there is a possibility that actually Edward may have met Christiana through his brother, William, when he married Ruth Babcock, who was a sister of Christiana, and they got married in 1854. Okay, and so there is a good chance that that's where he actually, I don't see Christian, but there is a chance that that's how they actually met. That is when they married and the barbershop. Again, there's a beautiful story, and I want to just remember it's different. The other thing is, the other thing that I learned is Edward probably owned his own barbershop in Marlborough, Massachusetts. There's a really good chance he owned his own barbershop. And in 1857, he put an ad in the Boston Herald, putting it up for sale, and said, "I'm moving on to a new business." That happens to be the same year he married Christiana.
There you go.
Right, interesting, right? So, I mean, it's amazing what you can find in a newspaper. I read all the time, and it's always the story they met, and again, maybe that happened, I don't know, but there's evidence to state that some other things may have happened along the way as well, in their lives. And I just want to touch a little bit on the article that both of you talked about as well, because that's a story that really talks about how Edward was motivated to, really become an artist and do these amazing things and stuff like that. Well, I can tell you that I have searched that newspaper and every other New York newspaper from that time period, 5 year spread, I can't find that article. I can't find it anywhere. I don't know where the story came from, and that article may actually exist. But I can tell you that I went for a year and a half and I've been unable to find it. And in some ways, I'm kind of grateful that I haven't been able to, because in my own sort of selfish sort of way, I would like to believe that Edward artistic inspiration came from something deeper than a newspaper article. And I would like to believe that that's how I would like to honor him and think about what really inspired him to do this beautiful work. Now, that doesn't dismiss the activator. I would like, he really didn't like art critics. And he had a lot to say about art critics, so I don't want to dismiss that either. But I haven't been able to find there. So that would be a surprise as well.
So if anyone finds it, well, let me know. Thank you so much. And so we're actually now
I don't think I can do that.
we're coming to the end of the event, so it's only fitting that we end talking about the completion of the statue. So, Mr. Gage, after you finish sculpting the wax, how is it cast in bronze?
After the years of the fundraising, all details of and bureaucracy of getting permissions to do things, and then a year of physically sculpting it, I load it up into a U-Haul truck and I bring it to Sincere Metal Works in Amesbury, Massachusetts, which is a great foundry, and they use the lost wax method, bronze casting, which you can find lots of YouTube videos on to make this at the end and give you makes sense. But first, they take my sculpture and they cut it to pieces, destroying it in the process. Then they make rubber wings of the sculptural pieces. They brush cast red wax into the molds to make 1/4 inch thick reproductions of the sculpture pieces. Think of making a bell, so the piece is going to be hollow. They attach screws, which are like little chimneys, to allow ventilation for when they are going to pour bronze into the ceramic shells. But they take all these wax pieces of the sculpture and dip them again and again into ceramic baths to build a sturdy ceramic shell. They take those shells, they put them in a giant kiln and they fire them to burn out all the wax so that it leaves a negative space that they will then fill with bronze to make the sculpture pieces. They heat the bronze ingots to about 2,000 degrees, give or take, in the crucible. While they're doing that, they keep ceramic shells in a giant oven. And I was there for part of this. They take the lid off of that oven. They're dressed up like baked potatoes. And I'm 20 feet away and I'm still my jeans were burning my legs. So then they take this huge crucible like something out of Hades, and they pour the molten bronze into the ceramic shells in complete silence, piece by piece, about 300 pounds at a time, because it starts to cool off, and if it cools off too much, you can't pour it anymore. And then they have to reheat. So after they fill the pieces, they do this over the course of several days. They let that cool naturally, because there's lots of bending and shifting and warping as the metal gets down to a cooler temperature and shrinks a little bit. Then they take everything from sledgehammers to all the way down to bending tools and knock and scrape all of the ceramic shell off the bronze pieces. They take those bronze pieces, they arrange them, they try to get them back with all the measurements and photos they took to reassemble your sculpture, spot weld it, and then hand weld all of the seams, and then hopefully we've got a very OCD crew. And they go in there with all their little tools and they get rid of all those seams, and they put a lot of texture on the piece. So they love me because they can hide it, but they hate me because they have to do all the texture. And then they make your sculpture again. They're truly the last artist to touch the piece. Because I had nothing to do with this except for maybe driving the 1.5 hours to see them and say, I think this head needs to be this way, look about 1/8 inch more. And then they take their torch, burn the neck, and do it. When they got it all back together and chased, they sandblast the whole thing, nice and clean. Then they use fire and different acids to get a patina on the top, which is the wonderful hue that you see there. And then they wax it. They have to wax it once or twice a year on the hottest day of the year. So they're putting another coat on every year. The whole process is incredibly expensive and takes about 6 months, start to finish. Sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less.
Okay. Yeah, right? And so,
Just, I've been asked, do they just take it like baby shoes and dip it into a batter?
Yeah. And so now we are, I guess, at the very end of our event, so thank you all so much, and please give a round of applause to our panelists. Our Q&A session of the event, so if anyone has any questions for any of our panelists, please raise your hands and someone will bring a microphone.
I have a question about, we had a range of times that he was, in the Providence area. And I'm wondering if you decided on the portrait of that moment. What about, Edward made you decide that was the way you wanted to capture that?
Well, the most important part of having the piece out in public was that it was going to be an encounter that he could have naturally. I wanted him to be doing something that he loved doing. If you haven't looked on his sketch pad, he's actually sketching Christiana, who is, there's an empty bench in front of him facing the river, and she's sitting on that bench in the sketch. So it was a double portrait. You couldn't do both of them on the bench, but I wanted to do that. And I didn't come up with a location. Ray Rickman, Sages of Freedom did. He took me from his office, walking right down, pointed at it, and he said, "This is where it needs to go." Because he used to walk right up this screen all the time. He painted in the corner. So I'm like, absolutely, let's ask if we could do it. And we were allowed to. It's a beautiful spot. People, especially students, are going by it all the time. You have water fire through there as well. And I wanted him to imagine. I wanted him to be inviting. And I didn't want you to feel like you were plugging him. You know, my original intention before I actually thought about it, to have him painting plein air somewhere in the city. But there are way too many sharp corners, way too many thin things that can sawzall, and all these horrible things you have to think about that could happen to a person in a city or a sculpture in a city. You know, because I don't like pedestals, I want to keep everyone ground level, that's so you can interact. And the bench just seemed like the most comfortable, inviting way. You can go to a sketch whatever you do, and kids can just hang all over it. So that's why it was just the most natural and loving way you can present. Yeah.
I couldn't help but notice from the beginning, actually, working on the project, that there's a lot of emotion attached to not only the creation of it, but to the doctor here who collected, and certainly to you. And I just wondered if any of you want to talk about what has created that sense of emotion in you.
Go ahead, Joe.
When I was young, I became interested in art and antiques. My parents used to go on Sunday rides, and my parents would tell us if we were good, we would go to the go-karts or drive a tugboat driving range after they played antique. I had 3 other brothers at the time, and there was always a lot of fighting in the car, and I was sick of it. And I asked my parents if I could please come in the shops, and they voted, and that my brothers, they wanted me in the car. So that's what we did, and as long as I didn't get into a break-in, that was the stipulation. So I became interested in different things. I used to go bottle digging with some friends of mine. And one particular friend, his father was the collector, and he would map out where the dumps were and this is where we go. And we actually got some nice bottles, and some of them were medicines. And at the time, my father would go to Eddie's Antiques in Smithfield. I don't know if any of you remember him, but he had all sorts of stuff, including trade cards. Trade cards were used to advertise many things, including cure-alls and medicines and whatnot. And what really got me, sometimes these images portrayed blacks in what I would think is not the greatest. Why would they do that on medicine if somebody's gonna take it, But they must have had a different perspective than I had. And they sold their medicines. And sometimes I would then became a little bit more interested in African American. And I started buying things, but I really prefer to purchase the more uplifting features or scenes or whatever. And that's what led me into the paintings as I got older. I met I don't know if any Kathy Burt. Her uncle was Hugo Burt, and he lived up the street from where I began my practice in the Younghurst area. And he mentored me, and I learned a lot about Edward Bannister from people. So that's kind of the circle there.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that. And does anyone have any other questions? Oh, we got it. Oh. We'll go right here and then we'll come to you. That's good. That's okay.
I have a question. So I'm a recent graduate of Boston, so I came here just not to support my friend, but also just about distributing bonds on software. I'm really touched by sort of Bannister for I think here also learning from you, sir, about art and construction and whatnot. In my area, I share destruction and reconstruction, and also we have different stories in our society today. I've witnessed it in the city, and there's people that's running up. So, what preventative measures do you have if someone were to analyze this wonderful project and how would you go repair for some of us to sculpting or problems, how safe to repair such a project?
The place I think that people will respect it. But if that doesn't happen, it is owned by the city and it is insured. So that means there is funding set aside for the horrible eventuality that someone would do something stupid to it. If that happens, and I know a couple of foundries who do restorative work, that we would just call them up, they would come down and they could fix almost anything. I mean, when I told the art club when they were very worried about something horrific happening, like a snowplow catching him and ripping him off and throwing him into the rivers, I said, not to worry, because I have all the modes. We have insured it for way more than it would cost to reproduce it at the foundry. And if anything ever happens to it, down from someone using magic marker on space, or trying to, tag Christiana on the sketch pad, all the way up to someone sawing his head off with a hacksaw, we can fix it. And I'm sure we'd have no trouble doing so. And I'll do it again. So,
Hi. The question that I did not know at all about that barber shops were a cultural sort of phenomenon where people came to talk and if anybody can tell me more about that,
Sorry, right.
if anybody can tell me more about that, how did that evolve? Who came? How did that all work?
Well, excuse me, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is I'm from New York. And so right away, soon as you said barbershop, I'm thinking Harlem, I'm thinking where my father used to go, take my brother all the time. But it's also a place of community. Barbershops, beauty shops, churches, those were places where the community, the African American community could meet without the eyes of the white community looking at them all the time. It was where they could be free. It was where they could express themselves. It was where they could talk about their abolitionism and what they were going to do. So, or even have, if they're a part of the Underground Railroad, how they were going to get this family from the South and through those into Boston and on to Canada. So that's what a barbershop or a beauty shop or a church or even someone's house represented, because there weren't a lot of places where Black people could be with freedom.
Excellent, thank you. Oh, sir, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. It's going to be, what would you say would be, what would Bannister mean to our Black artists today in 4 words?
My former refused to be silent.
Let me be free.
And so did we have any other questions? Any questions? Yep, one up in the front. I see those hands.
So I kind of know the answer to this, but Gage, tell us about transporting Mr. Bannister to the foundry and the U-Haul.
I'm a bit of a fluid here. And I forgot to take a final measurement from ground to head of Bannister sitting there. Now, what I didn't get to show you or really get to in my list of making is that when I made the armature, I had him welded to a steel plate by his right foot. Kind of like one of those, street performer tricks where he's sitting there, So all of this 3/4 inch piece of steel rod went up from his foot to his knee, bent into his pelvis. And that's holding all the weight of the piece so that he's not actually sitting on the bench. Because I made the bench out of wax and thin wood. So it would match the texture of the piece. So that thing, if you sit on it or press on it, will fall apart. So I didn't think to measure the full height, but because I did sales room, I was trying to cut down the cost of the rental for the U-Haul, like a van, a truck, a box truck. Because also, you don't want to drive something that huge through Boston. I worked for a bus company for many years, having to go municipality of Boston with a big truck, and it makes your hair gray or fall out. It gives you hives, it's awful. So I got a van instead, thinking, visually eyeballing it, yeah, that'll fit. Just, I had built a little plywood ramp, and I was going to fix all the bubble wrap and tape and bungee cords and get some momentum, because of course I didn't ask for any help. This all happened at 6 in the morning. So I go to rush him up, to push him up into the back of the van. And I don't know if I was channeling Spider-Man, but right before his side of his head collided with I stopped. And I realized now that he wasn't going to fit in there, and I had 2 choices. I could take all this apart, lose an hour or so of highway time, try to get to the foundry to drop us off on time in a certain window, to go get the box truck, or just heat up my fish fillet knife and sawzall and take his head off. So wearing his headset. Yes, exactly. So I'm sitting here just kind of I decided to be merciful, I took it all away, told the founders to be late. And I took the extra time, spent the extra money, got the box truck. And went there using an ace instead of the two I had dealt out. So they got this hat. Because I'm a class.
We have a question here in the back.
I'd like to know if there's an image of the painting that won the prize, and if anybody knows where it is. Nobody knows.
As far as I know, it disappeared and it's still being be found. But there are photos on it's still.
So
There's also a pencil sketch that exists, that you can look at, but the paint is gone.
it's gone.
But there are pencil sketches on it.
Oh, just on my side, if you want to see photographs of the entire process of the building of the statue, you can find it on the Prado Art Club website under Bannister tab, for, I think it's called the Artist Studio. And they made me take photos, pretty much, hundreds of photos of the process. You can go there and see all of it. And I warn you, it looks awfully different stuff.
Any videos?
Over my head.
That's the information of the painting when it was last seen. After winning the prize, under the oaks was sold to Williams and Everett dealers to a Mr. Duff of Boston for $1,500. Very high price for a painting in those days. Bannister received $850 as his portion. However, as characteristic of dealer artist relations at the time, Bannister did not initially learn who had purchased the painting. And he, only years later, he discovered accidentally where it was. And he then obtained permission to see it. He found it, quote, in his words, well hung on a French landing in the front hall of the Duff residence, with an easy chair placed so that Duff could observe the serene painting every morning before going to his office, the way I did with hay gardens. And today, however, neither the painting nor the medal Bannister received can be located. They do have the certificate at the art club, but those other items are still missing.
My hope is that the more people learn about Bannister, the more he becomes more well known. People are start looking at their acts and looking at storage units and all these things to find. I think the information is important because he used to run a photography studio in Boston. And I know from my photography that the cheapest model you have is yourself and your spouse. So I'm pretty sure one day someone's gonna open a trunk and have hundreds of images of and Christiana. Just hope it. Maybe I'll find out about it. So
Do we have any more questions in the crowd? Okay, well, before we wrap up, okay, one more.
Besides being the staff, you already probably an expensive project, already like a big. Management, so why not do something more like a painting or even just. I'm not too familiar with Rizzy, I don't know what approach we got, because I know it was all, we had a documentary, we had like an art department, like probably do more paintings. For me, I'm a chef, so what I would do is probably do like a whole menu based on Bannister, probably do some real painting, I get it, like, I don't know, is anything background, that's what I would do, I'm just like thinking some creative ideas. Or is there any other projects for other memorable artists that you have in the future?
I don't. I think you should absolutely do that. And I mean, my greatest hope is Bannister is so inspiring. You know, he's a chemical reaction. his charisma, he and Christiana, it has grown forward throughout history, and every single person that learns about him, sees his work, hears his story, brings people together. He's a force of nature, and the more he resonates, the more he echoes. I hope he inspires more artists of every single discipline: music, performance, culinary, sculpture, painting, film. I would love a film to be made about these guys. But to answer why I did a statue is because my wife is a historian, and I love history. And one of my greatest pleasures when I was in school, because it was free, was with my college pass, I'd go through the NFA in Boston and just walk around everywhere looking at all the work. And what's always struck me, and one of the reasons why I am sculptor in particular, is because as much as I love film and painting and performance and all these things sometimes get lost. You know, I try to think not in like decades or centuries, but thousands of years. And even in Pompeii now, they scratch the surface, a cloud goes through the field, and people find bronze. It's a traditional art form. And I think traditional art in bronze gets a really bad rap because they choose to commemorate in bronze. But it's a beautiful art form, and it can last forever. And what's more important is not the material, the traditional way of doing their representation, but who was chosen to be remembered. And I've been saying since the beginning, for me, this was not a memorial, it wasn't a monument. This was a portrait. This was just a portrait sculpture of Bannister. And in bronze, unless he's melted down for blood cases or weapons one day, he's going to exist in this form to inspire people, but also, if all the words are lost, his name is there. And his face is there. And whether you speak English, whether you know anything about our culture, even 4,000 years from now, as a human being, they're going to be able to look him in the face and feel something. They're going to be able to know what they're looking at and be curious about who they're looking at. And that's the whole reason that I work in that.
Thank you so much. And before we end, just very quickly, because we have something special for you all after this, I just want each panelist to just quickly say, what do you hope every guest takes away from this event tonight, and how would you like to see them share their experience?
I could say something. I didn't have the time to do it, but over my lifetime, I've found 6 unattributed and unsigned paintings that turned out to be in the Bannister. So if something's not signed, don't think it doesn't mean a whole lot, because in this one that I found, this particular one, is now at the Mount Holyoke Art Museum. They purchased it back in 2017. This was found on an eBay site in Cumberland, Rhode Island. And I actually went, I saw them up in Darren, said the same thing I did. This looks like a Bannister. I went to see it. I bought it at auction. I sent the image to Ann Avery, could not be here tonight. Ann Louise Avery. She is one of the main authenticators of Bannister's work for auction houses and personal collections in the U.S. And she said, of all of the unsigned Bannisters I've seen, this was the most obvious. So this particular one posted seen. And in any event, I'm proud to have owned it, found it. So this can, anyone, if they know his work, you might be able to find something out there.
And if no one would like to add anything else, we have a reception where there's going to be a lot more food. And if you do end up having questions for any of our panelists, they will be there to take more questions. But thank you all so much. Thank you. Great, so have a great day. Thank you.